The unexpected selection. Sarah Chin had seen many impossible things in her 5 years piloting transport shuttles across the outer colonies, but nothing had prepared her for the stellar assembly. The space station Harmony Prime floated like a crystalline crown in the void, its transparent walls revealing the swirling colors of the nebular expanse beyond. Inside, the main amphitheater stretched upward in spiraling tiers, each level designed to accommodate the wildly different physiologies of 100 alien species. She shouldn't even have been here. Sarah was just a transport pilot, someone who ferried supplies and occasionally diplomats between human outposts. But when Ambassador Reeves collapsed from a sudden illness just hours before the assembly, someone had to take his place. Someone with security clearance, someone already in the sector, someone expendable enough that their inevitable mistakes wouldn't start a war. Sarah fit all three criteria perfectly. The amphitheater hummed with a dozen different kinds of life. Crystalline beings chimed softly as they moved, their bodies refracting light into rainbow patterns. Gaseous entities contained in elaborate force field suits drifted overhead, their colors shifting with emotion or thought. Massive reptilian delegates occupied reinforced sections of seating, while tiny insectoid species clustered together in specialized gravity wells that let them walk on vertical surfaces. Sarah clutched her credentials tablet and searched desperately for the human delegation section. The station's translation implant behind her ear buzzed constantly, trying to convert the cacophony of languages into something comprehensible. It was giving her a headache. Every few seconds, she caught fragments of conversations in accented English. Resource disputes, trade negotiations, territorial claims, the usual diplomatic tensions that kept the galaxy from flying apart completely. She spotted what looked like an empty space near the middle tier and started climbing the curved walkway. Halfway there, a tentacled being oozed across her path, and Sarah backpedaled quickly, mumbling apologies. The being's translator rendered its response as something between a laugh and a warning about watching where inferior species walked. Sarah gritted her teeth and changed direction. The assembly was scheduled to begin in minutes, and she was running out of options. The human section, when she finally located it, was completely full. Of course it was. Earth had sent a full delegation this year, all of them experienced diplomats who knew exactly where to sit and when to arrive. Sarah was the awkward replacement, the amateur who didn't belong. She turned in a slow circle, scanning the tiers for any empty space. Nothing. Every seat, perch, floating platform and resting alcove was occupied. Her heart rate picked up. Standing during the assembly would mark her as unprepared, would embarrass humanity in front of species that already considered them barely civilized newcomers. Some species had been spacefaring for millennia. Humans had barely managed 3 centuries. A deep tone resonated through the amphitheater, the signal that the assembly would begin. Sarah's stomach dropped. She was out of time. Then she felt it. A presence behind her, something that made the air feel heavier, more charged. The conversations around her died in rippling waves of silence. Sarah turned slowly. Queen Valerith of the Kalorn Empire stood less than 3 meters away. Sarah had seen images, of course. Everyone had. The Kalorn were one of the galaxy's 3 great powers, an empire spanning 200 worlds. But images didn't capture the reality. The queen stood nearly 7 feet tall, her body covered in scales that shifted from deep violet to silver depending on the light. Her face was elegant and alien, with large eyes that held vertical pupils and seemed to see through pretense directly into truth. 4 arms moved with fluid grace, 2 folded across her chest, 2 hanging relaxed at her sides. A crest of crystalline protrusions rose from her skull, catching the light and throwing patterns across nearby surfaces. She wore robes of deep crimson and gold that somehow made her look both regal and ready for battle. Behind her, 6 Kalorn guards stood in perfect formation, their armor gleaming, their weapons visible but not threatening. Yet, every being in the amphitheater was staring. Sarah couldn't breathe. The queen moved forward with predatory smoothness. One of her 4 hands extended toward Sarah, and before Sarah could process what was happening, those scaled fingers closed gently but firmly around her wrist. "Sit right next to me," Queen Valerith said, her voice deep and resonant, carrying easily through the sudden silence. Sarah's brain produced several responses simultaneously. Most of them involved confused stammering. What actually came out of her mouth was, what? The queen's eyes showed something that might have been amusement. "You were searching for a seat. I am offering one. Do you accept?" The translation implant was working perfectly, which meant Sarah had heard correctly. The queen of the Kalorn Empire, ruler of 200 worlds, whose species had conquered half a dozen others through a combination of military might and brilliant strategy, was inviting a random human to sit beside her throne. Sarah glanced around desperately, looking for anyone who might explain what was happening. She found only shocked faces. A delegate whose species resembled a floating jellyfish had actually stopped mid-drift, tendrils hanging limply in surprise. The massive reptilian beings had gone completely still, which Sarah had learned meant they were experiencing intense emotion. "Your Majesty," Sarah managed, "I'm just a replacement. I'm not even a real ambassador. Surely there's been some mistake." "There is no mistake," the Queen said. Her grip on Sarah's wrist remained gentle but absolutely unyielding. "Come." It wasn't really a request. The Queen turned and began walking toward the central dais where the most powerful species had their seats. Sarah stumbled along behind her, very aware that she was still being held. The crowd parted instantly, delegates scrambling to clear a path. Sarah's mind raced. This had to be political. The Queen didn't do anything without strategy. But what strategy involved a random human pilot? What game was being played here? They reached the central dais and Sarah got her first clear look at the throne. It wasn't just a chair. It was a statement. Carved from a single piece of dark stone that seemed to absorb light, it rose from the floor like a natural formation. Beside it, a smaller seat had appeared, smooth and elegant, clearly designed for a humanoid form. The Queen released Sarah's wrist and gestured to the smaller seat. "Sit." Sarah sat. The seat adjusted automatically to her body, probably through some technology she couldn't begin to understand. The Queen settled onto her throne with the kind of grace that came from a lifetime of power. She arranged her forearms carefully, 2 on the armrests, 2 folded in her lap, and turned her gaze outward to the assembly. Every eye, sensor, and optical array in the amphitheater was locked on them. Sarah's hands were shaking. She clasped them together and tried to remember how to breathe normally. Beside her, the Queen sat perfectly still, radiating calm authority. One of her lower hands moved slightly, resting on the armrest closest to Sarah. It was casual, almost careless, but Sarah understood the message. The Queen was claiming her, protecting her, using her. The Assembly's chief arbiter, a being that looked like living mercury poured into a vaguely humanoid shape, flowed onto the central speaking platform. Its translated voice rang out in the amphitheater. "The Stellar Assembly recognizes all present delegations. Let the proceedings begin." What followed was 2 hours of the most intense diplomatic theater Sarah had ever witnessed. Trade disputes were argued with the passion of holy wars. Territorial claims were defended with elaborate historical precedents. Resource allocation debates became philosophical arguments about the nature of ownership and survival. Through it all, Sarah sat beside the Queen, acutely aware of her own inadequacy. She wasn't trained for this. She didn't understand half the references, couldn't follow the complex web of alliances and grudges that informed every statement. She was a fraud in a seat meant for someone vastly more qualified. But something strange was happening. Whenever a delegate spoke directly to the Kalorn Empire, they couldn't help but glance at Sarah. When challenges were issued, eyes flickered between the Queen and the human beside her. Sarah was becoming part of the equation without saying a single word. The Queen spoke rarely, but when she did, her words carried weight that silenced debates. She argued for expanded trade routes with elegant logic. She defended her empire's territorial claims with historical evidence that no one could refute. And occasionally, so subtly that Sarah almost missed it, one of the Queen's hands would move near Sarah, a gesture that drew every eye in the room. During a brief recess, Sarah finally found her voice. "Your Majesty, I don't understand what's happening." "Why me?" The Queen turned her full attention to Sarah for the first time since they'd sat down. Those vertical pupils fixed on her with an intensity that made Sarah feel transparent. "Tell me, Sarah Chin, what do you see when you look at this assembly?" The use of her name surprised Sarah. The Queen had done her research. "I see species trying to avoid war while preparing for it. I see alliances held together by mutual fear. I see a lot of beings who think they're better than everyone else. And what do they see when they look at humanity?" Sarah didn't have to think about that answer. Newcomers. Primitives who got lucky and found some old technology. A species that doesn't know its place yet. "Precisely," the Queen said. "They underestimate you. They dismiss you. And that makes you valuable." "Valuable how?" The Queen's crest caught the light as she tilted her head slightly. "Because I do not underestimate you. Your species has survived ice ages, plagues, wars that should have destroyed you completely. You have gone from stone tools to faster-than-light travel in the blink of an evolutionary eye. You adapt faster than any species I have studied. And right now, I need adaptation." I still don't understand. You will, the Queen said. Watch what happens next. The assembly reconvened and Sarah watched. A delegate from the Thurian Collective, a species of militant insectoids that had been expanding aggressively for decades, rose to speak. Their translated voice dripped with contempt. The Kalorn Empire has grown weak. Queen Valerith surrounds herself with lesser species, seeking allies among those who cannot hope to match Kalorn's strength. This is not the behavior of a great power. This is the behavior of a failing empire desperate for relevance. The amphitheater went dead silent. Several delegates actually edged away from the Thurian representative, as if expecting an explosion. The Queen didn't move. Her expression didn't change. But Sarah felt something shift in the air, a tension that made her skin prickle. You speak of strength, the Queen said, her voice carrying clearly. But you demonstrate ignorance. Tell me, Representative Kethtar, how many worlds has your collective discovered in the past decade? 17, the Thurian replied proudly. And how many have you actually colonized successfully? Pause. 8. Interesting, the Queen said. Humanity, in their brief time in space, has successfully established colonies on 23 worlds. Many of them in conditions your species would find impossible. They terraform planets. They adapt to environments that would kill most of us. They turn wastelands into homes. She leaned forward slightly, and Sarah saw several delegates actually lean back in response. You call them lesser. I call them survivors. And I would rather have survivors at my side than warriors who only know how to fight the same war over and over. Then the Queen did something that made Sarah's heart stop. She placed one of her 4 hands on Sarah's shoulder. The gesture was unmistakable, deliberate, claiming. This human, the Queen continued, arrived here by accident. She is a transport pilot, not a trained diplomat. Yet she has shown more composure in the last 2 hours than most of your trained representatives show in a full session. She does not panic. She does not demand attention. She observes, she adapts, and she endures. These are the qualities I value. These are the qualities that will matter in what is coming. And what is coming, Your Majesty? Another delegate asked, voice carefully neutral. The Queen's eyes swept across the entire assembly. Change. The kind that destroys empires who cannot adapt and elevates those who can. You may continue to underestimate humanity. I will continue to recognize their potential. We shall see which approach proves wiser. She settled back onto her throne, hands still resting on Sarah's shoulder. The weight of it was considerable, but Sarah didn't move. She couldn't. She was beginning to understand the game, and it terrified her. The Queen wasn't using her as a symbol. She was using her as a mirror, reflecting back the assembly's own prejudices and forcing them to question their assumptions. And somehow, impossibly, it was working. For the first time since sitting down, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Maybe she wasn't qualified for this position. Maybe she was completely out of her depth. But she was human, and humans had built an entire civilization out of being underestimated. If the Queen wanted adaptation, Sarah would show her what adaptation really looked like. The session continued, but something had fundamentally changed. The Thurian representative sat down without another word. Other delegates began directing questions to the Kalorn Empire with more caution, more respect. And through it all, Sarah sat beside the Queen, learning the language of power spoken without words. By the time the day session ended, Sarah Chin understood one absolute truth. She had been chosen not despite being unprepared, but because of it. The Queen had needed someone genuine, someone who couldn't fake the diplomatic dance, someone whose very presence would disrupt every careful assumption. As the amphitheater emptied, the Queen finally removed her hand from Sarah's shoulder. You did well. I barely did anything, Sarah said. Exactly, the Queen replied. Tomorrow will require more. Are you prepared? Sarah thought about lying, then decided the Queen would see through it instantly. No. But I'll manage anyway. That's what we do. For the first time, Queen Valeritha's expression shifted into something that might have been approval. Good. That is precisely why you are here. As Sarah followed the Queen out of the amphitheater, past staring delegates and whispering clusters of aliens, she realized her role as a simple transport pilot was over. Whether she wanted it or not, she had become something far more complicated. She had become a symbol of humanity's potential, chosen by one of the galaxy's greatest powers to prove a point. The only question was whether she could actually live up to it. The alliance forged. Sarah woke to an urgent chiming from her quarters communication panel. The station's artificial dawn had barely begun filtering through the viewport, painting the nebular expanse in shades of amber and violet. She rolled out of the narrow bunk, still wearing yesterday's clothes, and stumbled to the panel. Queen Valeritha's face filled the screen, her crystalline crest catching the dim light. Sarah Chin. You will join me for morning preparations. My guards are outside your door. The connection cut before Sarah could respond. She looked down at herself, rumpled and decidedly undiplomatic, then at the door. Sure enough, when she opened it, 2 Kalorn guards stood in the corridor, their armor gleaming even in the low light. They were each nearly 8 feet tall, making Sarah feel like a child standing between them. Her Majesty requests your presence, one said, voice filtered through a translator that made it sound like distant thunder. Sarah had approximately 30 seconds to decide whether she was doing this. Then she remembered the look on the Thurian delegate's face yesterday when the Queen had claimed her as an ally. She remembered the subtle shift in how other species had begun addressing the human delegation. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than her comfort level. Lead the way, she said. The Queen's quarters occupied an entire section of the station's inner ring, a suite that was more palace than accommodation. Guards stood at every entrance, and the walls displayed slowly shifting patterns that Sarah suspected were Kalorn art or possibly security systems. Maybe both. Queen Valerith stood before a massive viewport, all 4 arms held in different positions that Sarah was beginning to recognize as a meditation pose. She turned as Sarah entered, and her guards immediately withdrew, leaving them alone. You look terrible, the Queen observed. Thank you, Your Majesty. I didn't sleep well. I kept replaying yesterday and wondering what I've gotten myself into. Honesty. Good. The Queen moved to a low table where breakfast had been arranged. It was an odd combination of foods, some clearly Kalorn, others obviously prepared for human consumption. Sit. We have much to discuss before today's session. Sarah sat carefully on a cushion designed for beings with more legs than her. Your Majesty, I need to understand what's really happening. Yesterday felt like theater and I was a prop you used to make a point. But there's something else going on, isn't there? The Queen's vertical pupils focused on her with that same intensity from yesterday. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, you are perceptive. Yes, there is more. The assembly you witnessed yesterday is a formality, a ritual we perform to maintain the illusion of diplomatic progress. The Real Assembly, the one that determines the future of this galaxy, happens in private meetings. In alliances formed away from public eyes. And you need humanity for one of these alliances? I need humanity for survival, the Queen said bluntly. Mine and yours both. Sarah set down the piece of fruit she'd been about to eat. Explain. The Queen rose and gestured to the viewport. Beyond the station, the nebular expanse swirled in cosmic beauty, but Sarah noticed something else now. Ships. Hundreds of them, arranged in distinct clusters. Different species, different fleets, all maintaining careful distances from each other. 3 powers have dominated this galaxy for millennia, the Queen said. The Kalorn Empire, the Vrothian hegemony, and the Selvath Commonwealth. We have fought wars, made peace, fought again. A cycle that has repeated so many times it has become tradition. But something has changed. She touched a control panel and the viewport zoomed in on one cluster of ships. They were angular, aggressive, covered in weapon arrays that looked excessive even for military vessels. The Vrothians are preparing for total war. Not a border skirmish or a territorial dispute. Total war. They have been building their fleet for 20 years, hidden in systems we did not monitor carefully enough. They plan to strike both the Selvath and Kalorn simultaneously, to end the cycle permanently by dominating completely. Sarah felt cold. How long until they move? Months. Perhaps weeks. Our intelligence differs. The Queen turned back to her. The Selvath and Kalorn have been enemies for generations. Our peoples hate each other for reasons so old we have forgotten the origins. But we both know that if the Vrothians attack while we are divided, we will fall. We must form an alliance, the first in 3 centuries. And where does humanity fit into this? The Queen's expression shifted into something that might have been respect. You asked the correct question. The problem is trust. The Selvath do not trust the Kalorn. We do not trust them. Both of us have broken treaties before, betrayed each other when advantageous. We need a mediator, a neutral party that neither side has sufficient history with to fear betrayal. Humanity, Sarah breathed. You want us to broker an alliance between 2 species that have been enemies since before we even left Earth. More than broker. We need you to guarantee it. To be present in our councils, to witness our agreements, to serve as living proof that we are committed to peace with each other. The Queen's 4 arms gestured in what Sarah had learned was emphasis. Yesterday was a test. I needed to see if the other species would accept a human in a position of power beside me. Many were shocked, but none objected openly. That is progress. Sarah stood and walked to the viewport, her mind racing. Your Majesty, I'm a transport pilot. I barely understand basic diplomacy. You need someone trained for this, someone who knows how to negotiate between hostile powers. I need someone they will underestimate, the Queen said. Someone who can speak truth without being dismissed as a political operative. Someone whose species is new enough to this galaxy that you carry no ancient grudges. You proved yesterday that you can endure scrutiny. Now I need to know if you can endure pressure. Before Sarah could respond, alarms shrieked through the station. The viewport flashed red, and the Queen's translator implant lit up with urgent messages. She listened for 3 seconds, and her scales shifted from violet to a darker, angrier purple. The Vrothians have moved sooner than we thought. They are attacking the Selveth colony of Meridian's Edge. It is beginning. Sarah's blood turned to ice. How many Selveth are on that colony? 4 million. Plus another million of various other species, including 3,000 humans. The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. 3,000 humans. People she might know, might have transported at some point in her career. People who were about to die if the Vrothians weren't stopped. What can we do? Sarah asked. The Kalorn fleet cannot reach Meridian's Edge in time. The Selveth defense forces are scattered. By the time they rally, the colony will be destroyed. The Queen's frustration was visible in every line of her body. This is precisely what the Vrothians wanted. To force our hand, to make us choose between defending ourselves and helping our enemies. Sarah thought fast, her pilot's brain automatically calculating vectors and timing. What about civilian ships? Transport vessels? If we can evacuate even a portion of the colony population. Civilian vessels lack military-grade shields. The Vrothians would destroy them before they reached the surface. Not if they had an escort, Sarah said. Not if someone drew the Vrothian fire away from the evacuation ships long enough for them to get people off-world. The Queen looked at her sharply. That would be a suicide mission. The escort vessels would be destroyed. Maybe. Or maybe they'd be fast enough and clever enough to survive. Sarah met the Queen's eyes. Your Majesty, you said humanity adapts. You said we turn wastelands into homes. But what we're really good at, what we've always been good at, is surviving impossible situations through sheer stubborn refusal to die. Let me prove it. For 5 long seconds, the Queen was silent. Then she moved to her communication panel with startling speed. All Kalorn military vessels in Sector 7, prepare for immediate deployment. All civilian transport ships, I am issuing an emergency conscription order. You will proceed to Meridian's Edge and conduct evacuation operations. She turned to Sarah. You will coordinate the evacuation. My tactical officers will provide support, but you know civilian vessels better than any Kalorn. Choose your escorts carefully. I can spare 12 military ships, no more. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. I'll need direct communication with the Selveth defenders. They need to know we're coming or they might fire on us. I will contact the Selveth directly. The Queen's expression was fierce. If they are wise, they will accept help from their enemies. If not, millions will die for their pride. The next 4 hours were a blur of organized chaos. Sarah found herself in the station's command center, surrounded by Kalorn tactical officers who looked at her with barely concealed skepticism. She didn't blame them. She was coordinating a military operation with zero military training. But she knew ships. She knew how fast each model could move, how much cargo they could carry, how their shields operated. She divided the civilian vessels into waves, each protected by Kalorn warships that would draw Vrothian fire. She plotted approach vectors that minimized exposure time. She calculated evacuation rates and prioritized the most vulnerable populations. The Kalorn officers began to watch her differently. What had been skepticism shifted to something else. Not quite respect, but acknowledgement. She was competent, and in a crisis, competence mattered more than species. The Queen stood in the center of the command center, communicating directly with the Selveth government. Sarah could hear fragments of the conversation through the translation network, and it wasn't going well. The Selveth leader was refusing assistance, claiming the Kalorn were using the crisis as a pretext for invasion. Then Sarah heard something that made her stomach drop. The Selveth defense commander at Meridian's Edge had broken protocol and was accepting the evacuation offer against his government's orders. He was a military officer named Commander Thexus, and his translated voice carried exhaustion and desperation. My people are dying. I will accept help from demons themselves if it saves their lives. Then you shall have it, the Queen replied. The evacuation fleet is en route. Coordinates are being transmitted now. Sarah pulled up the tactical display and watched the fleet approach Meridian's edge. The Vrothian attack force was massive, easily triple the size of anything the Selvath could field alone. Their strategy was brutal and effective. Orbital bombardment followed by ground invasion. The colony's shields were already failing. First wave entering combat zone, a Kalorn officer reported. Vrothian vessels are engaging. On the display, red indicators swarmed the green markers of the evacuation fleet. Sarah's carefully planned approach vectors were immediately chaos. The Vrothians weren't just attacking the military escorts. They were targeting the civilian transports. They're trying to maximize casualties, Sarah said. They want this to be a massacre that prevents any future cooperation. Then we do not allow it, the Queen said. She opened a direct channel to the fleet. All Kalorn vessels revised orders. You are authorized to engage with extreme prejudice. Protect those transports at any cost. Sarah watched the battle unfold in real-time data streams. The Kalorn escorts were outnumbered, but they fought with a ferocity that surprised even her. They placed themselves between the transports and the Vrothian attackers, absorbing damage that would have destroyed the civilian ships. 3 escorts were destroyed in the first 10 minutes. But the transports reached the surface. Sarah watched the evacuation numbers climb. 50,000 evacuated, then 100,000, then 200,000. Each transport could only carry so many, and they had to make multiple trips through an active war zone. Second wave approaching, an officer reported. Vrothian reinforcements detected. They're bringing in heavier ships. Sarah's mind raced. The second wave wouldn't survive the same approach. They needed a different strategy. Can we disable any Vrothian vessels instead of destroying them? Create obstacles in their formation? A Kalorn tactical officer looked at her in confusion. Why would we want obstacles? Because obstacles disrupt targeting solutions. If we can create enough chaos in their formation, the transports can slip through while the Vrothians are repositioning. The officer's expression changed. That could work. It is unconventional, but it could work. The Queen was already issuing orders. All vessels, prioritize propulsion and weapons systems on Vrothian ships. We need them disabled, not destroyed. Create maximum disruption. The strategy worked better than Sarah had dared hope. Disabled Vrothian vessels drifted into their own formation, forcing their fleet to maneuver around them. The second wave of transports reached the surface and began loading refugees. Then Commander Thexus's voice came through the communication channel, urgent and strained. Evacuation control, we have a critical problem. The colony's main shelter is under direct assault. 200,000 civilians trapped inside. Shields failing. We cannot hold. Sarah pulled up the location. The shelter was on the opposite side of the colony from the evacuation zones, too far for the transports to reach in time. How long can the shelter hold? 8 minutes. Maybe 10. Sarah looked at the tactical display, calculating distances and speeds. Then she saw it, a pattern in the Vrothian attack. They were concentrating their forces on the shelter, leaving their rear relatively unguarded. A fast ship could potentially get through, but it would have to survive the return trip through the entire Vrothian fleet. I need a fast ship, Sarah said. The fastest you have. The Queen turned to her, understanding immediately what Sarah was planning. No. You are too valuable to lose on a... 3,000 humans are on that colony, Sarah interrupted. And 200,000 Selvath are about to die in that shelter. If I don't try, what was yesterday worth? What was any of this worth? The Queen's scales shifted through several colors Sarah hadn't seen before. Conflict, anger, reluctant admiration. You understand this is likely suicide. I understand that it's necessary. For a moment, the command center went silent. Then the Queen made a gesture that Sarah had learned meant decision. Prepare my personal courier ship. It is the fastest vessel we have. Sarah Chin will pilot it. Your Majesty, an officer protested, that ship is mine to use as I see fit, the Queen said. Sarah, you will have 1 Kalorn weapons officer and the best shields my engineers can install in the next 3 minutes. After that, you are on your own. Sarah was already moving toward the hangar. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was clear. This was insane. This violated every survival instinct she had. But she had sat beside a queen and represented her entire species in front of the galaxy. She had helped coordinate an impossible evacuation. She had become something more than a transport pilot. She had become a symbol. And symbols didn't get to hide when things got dangerous. The courier ship was beautiful, sleek and deadly, designed for speed above all else. The Kalorn weapons officer was already aboard, a female warrior named Vextha who looked at Sarah with open skepticism. "You are the human everyone speaks of," Vextha said. "The Queen's chosen." "I'm the human who's about to fly us into an enemy fleet," Sarah replied, settling into the pilot's seat. "If you want to object, now's the time." Vextha's scales shifted to a deep blue that Sarah had learned meant determination. "I do not object. I merely wish to know if you are as capable as Her Majesty believes." "We're about to find out." The ship launched with acceleration that would have killed a human without the inertial dampeners. Sarah pushed the engines to maximum, plotting a course that took them through the gaps in the Vrothian formation. The weapons officer handled defensive fire, her 4 arms moving across multiple control panels simultaneously. They were detected immediately. Vrothian ships turned to intercept, weapons charging. Sarah threw the courier ship into a series of maneuvers that her instructors would have called reckless and possibly suicidal. The ship's shields absorbed hit after hit, each impact making the entire vessel shudder. "Shields at 60%, Vextha reported calmly. 50%. 40. "Hold on," Sarah said, and dove straight toward the planet's surface. The atmospheric entry was rough, flames engulfing the hull as they hit the atmosphere at speeds that made the ship's computer scream warnings. Vrothian fighters followed, but the atmosphere disrupted their targeting. Sarah used every bit of her piloting skill, flying low enough that the ground was a blur beneath them. The shelter appeared ahead, its shields flickering and failing. Sarah brought the ship in hard, landing in the only clear space available. The cargo ramp dropped before they'd fully touched down. "Everyone who can move, get on board now." Sarah shouted into the colony's emergency frequency. "We have maybe 5 minutes." They came in a flood. Selvath civilians, their skin patterns showing terror and hope mixed together. Other species Sarah barely recognized. And yes, humans. She saw their faces, exhausted and grateful, as they poured into the cargo hold. The ship's computer told her they were over capacity. Sarah ignored it. More people kept coming. Children, elderly, wounded. The cargo hold was packed beyond safety limits and still they came. "That's all." A Selvath emergency worker shouted. "Everyone who can fit is aboard. Then hold on to something." Sarah fired the engines before the cargo ramp had fully closed. The ascent was worse than the descent. The ship was overloaded, handling like a drunk elephant. Vrothian fighters swarmed them immediately. Vextha fired back with everything the courier ship had, but they were outnumbered 20 to 1. "Shields failing," Vextha said. "We will not make orbit." Sarah didn't answer. She was too busy flying, pushing the ship beyond its designed limits, finding paths through enemy fire that shouldn't have existed. Her hands moved across the controls with desperate precision. Die here or save 200,000 lives. The choice was obvious. Then something extraordinary happened. The Kalorn military escorts, the ones supposed to be protecting the evacuation transports, broke formation. All of them. They accelerated toward Sarah's position, placing themselves between the overloaded courier ship and the Vrothian fighters. The Queen's voice came through Sarah's communicator. "All ships, defend that courier vessel. It carries our future." What followed was the most intense 10 minutes of Sarah's life. The Kalorn escorts fought with absolute disregard for their own survival, creating a corridor through the enemy fleet. 3 more escorts were destroyed. 4 others took critical damage. But they held the line long enough for Sarah to reach the safety of the main evacuation zone. When Sarah finally set the courier ship down on a Kalorn carrier, her entire body was shaking. The cargo hold doors opened and the evacuees poured out, many collapsing in relief. Medical teams rushed forward. Commander Thexus himself was there, his Selvath features showing an expression Sarah's translator identified as profound gratitude. "You saved them. You flew through an enemy fleet and saved them." "We saved them," Sarah corrected. "Your people held the Vrothians off long enough. The Kalorn provided the escorts. I just flew the ship." "Just," Thexus repeated and made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Human, you are either the bravest pilot I have ever seen or the most insane. Possibly both." "Also both," Sarah admitted. By the time the evacuation was complete, over 3 million civilians had been saved. Not all of them. Sarah tried not to think about the million who hadn't made it. But 3 million lives that would have been lost were instead on evacuation ships, heading to safety. The battle for Meridian's Edge continued for another day. The Vrothians eventually withdrew when a combined Kalorn and Selvath fleet arrived. It was the first time the 2 powers had fought on the same side in living memory. Sarah stood in the command center, exhausted beyond measure, and watched the tactical display clear. The Queen approached, her 4 arms held in a gesture of respect. You risked your life to save Selvath civilians. After what I asked of you, after the pressure I placed upon you, you could have refused. Why did you do it? Sarah thought about the question. Because you were right. Humanity adapts. But we also have a rule that we don't leave people behind when we can save them. Species doesn't matter. If we can help, we do. It's not always smart, but it's who we are. The Queen was silent for a long moment. Then she did something Sarah hadn't seen before. She placed all 4 of her hands together in front of her chest, a gesture so formal that every Kalorn in the command center immediately stopped what they were doing. Sarah Chin of Earth, the Queen said, her voice carrying through the entire command center. I name you Ambassador of Humanity to the Kalorn Empire. You will speak with my voice in matters concerning our alliance. You will carry the weight of 2 species on your shoulders. Do you accept this responsibility? Sarah wanted to say no. She wanted to go back to being a simple transport pilot flying cargo between colonies, living a quiet life. But she looked at the tactical display, at the ships carrying millions of evacuees to safety, and she knew that quiet life was gone forever. I accept, she said. The Queen's scales shifted to brilliant gold, a color Sarah had never seen on any Kalorn. Then let it be known, humanity and the Kalorn Empire stand together. Let the Vrothians fear our alliance. Let the Selvath see that former enemies can become trusted partners. Let the galaxy know that a new age has begun. Commander Thexus appeared on the communication screen, transmitted from the Selvath flagship. Queen Valerith, we have witnessed the Kalorn sacrifice to save our people. We have seen a human risk death for Selvath civilians. My government has authorized me to begin preliminary alliance discussions. Then let us discuss, the Queen said. Ambassador Chen will represent humanity's interests in these negotiations. I trust you will find her enlightening. Thexus's expression showed what Sarah's translator identified as amusement. I have heard reports of her piloting. Enlightening seems an insufficient word. As the command center erupted in activity, preparing for the historic negotiations to come, Sarah felt the full weight of what she had become. She was no longer just a pilot. She was a bridge between species, a living symbol of cooperation, an ambassador who had earned her position through actions rather than credentials. The Queen placed one hand on Sarah's shoulder, the same gesture she had made in the assembly. You were searching for a seat and I gave you a throne. Now the question is, can you help me build the peace that will fill all the seats in this galaxy? Sarah looked out at the stars, at the ships of 3 great powers beginning the slow, difficult work of learning to trust each other. She thought about the millions saved, the thousands who had died, and the billions whose futures now depended on whether former enemies could become allies. I don't know, Sarah said honestly. But I'm human. We don't give up easily. Let's find out together. The Queen's scales shifted through colors Sarah was only beginning to understand, and in that moment, Sarah Chin knew her life had changed forever. She had gone from searching for a seat to sitting beside a queen to becoming a voice that might help save the galaxy. And it had all started because she was in the wrong place at the right time, and a queen had decided to take a chance on humanity's potential. The alliance was forged that day, not in treaties or formal agreements, but in sacrifice and courage. The Vrothians would continue to threaten. The galaxy would continue to be dangerous. But for the first time in millennia, 3 great powers were talking instead of fighting. And standing between them, making sure they kept talking, was a human who had learned that sometimes the most important qualification for changing history was simply being willing to try.